Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. See if the video is looking good. Yep. All right. How is everyone doing? Keenan, welcome. Well, it is island, so if you're gonna do green, that's the way to do it. All right. How's everyone been? First rainy day in a little while. Oh, really? Cool, cool. Yeah, it is. It's winter's kind of been threatening, but today is one of the evenings you're really starting to feel it. Well, I mean, as much as you can call a Durban winter, because a lot of people would be laughing at our winters. But yeah, otherwise, I like it. I prefer it when it's chilly than when it's super boiling hot, which is the other mode that we get down here in Durban. Yeah, it's so much easier to just be able to wear something warm and be comfortable than try to do something the other way around. Just doesn't work nearly as effectively. So, how are you all managing with the lockdown? Hope everyone is keeping safe, trying their best, social distancing. It's very important. Uh, I was following the conversations in my daughter's class group. She's in grade 2. It's been rough. You can see from the messages that some of the parents are posting there. It's like they're trying to work from home, plus do all the chores, plus cooking, plus sit with their, in some cases, multiple kids, homework, keep the little ones entertained, and yeah, it's a struggle. It's a struggle for a lot of people. Um, yeah. So, huh? Okay. Do you have a piano? That's interesting. I played up to I think it was matric, just a bit after matric. I played piano for 10 years. I started off on the keyboard um, for about 2 or 3 years, and then I transitioned to piano proper. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. So now I think anything beyond Mary Had a Little Lamb is beyond me. It's been a while since I've played. Okay, okay. Yeah, that's definitely something that's very interesting these days because I don't think we had much of those when I was learning the piano. This apps and online courses and even gamification of how to to keep you motivated, to keep you interested. There really wasn't much of that um, like you have now. It's definitely a lot easier, a lot more enjoyable, I would think, to learn an instrument now than it would have been a while back. Awesome. So let's kick off today's session. Welcome. My name is Satish, and this is Code to Career. The aim of Code to Career is to create a community for software developers, especially those with little to no working experience. It is a place for them to get information on what to expect in the working world. I've worked with many juniors and interns over the years, and this is my way of trying to help them bridge that gap when entering the professional space. Before I start off, a few disclaimers. I am not claiming to be any kind of expert. I will share what I have learned, what I have seen, what I know new employees struggle with. But not everything works for everyone. You have to pick and choose what makes sense for you, what fits with your style, your goals, and your attitude. We will talk about things that can seem very abstract. This is what happens when you have little to no experience in the working world. You have no way of understanding unless you've been in those situations, in those environments. Remembering what we talk about will shine a light on these situations when we encounter them. There are exceptions to probably every single thing I say. Situations are rarely simple, and it is only our lack of understanding that makes situations seem simple or obvious. All right. The aim for today's talk was based around the idea of good development based around technical skills. This has been an interesting one. And I think it's not really one that kind of fits well with that topic. And the reason being is because so much of technical skills depends on what you're actually working with. What languages, what frameworks, where you are in your career or what environments you're working in. Technical skills will affect each and every one of those. And so I've kind of put down what what kind of best fits into that space. So let's get to it and we'll see what's good. Special consideration for this particular topic. I've worked with interns who can go on their own and figure out how to work with a framework. I've also worked with interns who have struggled to find their way around a for loop. With this in mind, I cannot, in one discussion, cover both those sets of individuals and all the different levels in between. Before we even started studying software, we were at a certain level. Based on that, we would have moved to a higher level by the time we had finished studying. There's only one equation that matters. Where you want to get to, subtract where you currently are equals the amount of work you have to put in. Remind me at the end, I'll tell you all about the story about levels in IT versus other careers. So, software languages. There are two parts to working with a language. First is understanding a language, learning its rules, the syntax, how it works, etc. And then comes thinking in a language. This is a distinction you begin to notice as you learn more than one language. Portion of your ability to think logically is based on the language you first learned. However, over time, as you learn other languages, you will start to see how the lines of logic and language are a bit blurred in some places. Developers can get very confused by this. They do things like blame the new language they learned, how it's broken or not as good as the language they learned first. But languages are just languages. There are a bunch of rules, and the compiler makes sure we follow those rules. And as you get past this, you realize that logic and language are completely separate. Understanding the underlying nature of a language is important. How is memory managed by the language? How do pointers work? When you start thinking in these terms, you will realize that all languages have the same underlying building blocks. They have the same problems to solve. How those problems are solved are dependent on the end goal. Is your language about working with hardware? What about speed? Ease of use? Perhaps a tiny memory footprint? Based on these requirements, certain decisions are made as to how to solve the problems before you have a working language. This mindset, this form of thinking widely, is going to be incredibly important when you have to solve problems on a day-to-day basis. There is a massive difference between writing some code to solve a problem and it being ready to go live. Does it have test cases? Have you tested it? Has the testing department tested it? Is it ready for deployment? Does the change need to be signed off for the production environment? Is it secure? And probably 20 other requirements that no one really puts down up front. Yet every single one of those on that list is incredibly important. And based on this, we come across one of the first forms of difference between what we are taught and what the reality is. If you are good in a specific area, a form of thinking, a specific technical layer, then you should push that and polish it and focus on it. That expertise is going to be more important to your career and to a company than your ability to simply write standard code. Do you have an unusually good understanding of web security? Does thinking in workflows come easily and naturally? Have you developed a solid understanding of deployment procedures? Perhaps you're good at quantifying and identifying risks. As you work with code over time, you need to try to find these areas of specialty that allow you to get ahead of the rest. All of these and more will make you a better developer. Don't be a Stack Overflow developer. So what exactly is that? Let's say you have to solve a code problem and you're stuck. You go to Stack Overflow for help. You find the answer. You copy and paste what you find. It does what it is supposed to do and your problem is solved. This is fantastic. Very soon, this becomes a skill. Finding and using other people's code. The problem becomes when this becomes your only skill. If you're not going to understand what you put in when you're introducing massive risk to your team and your company, now this can be a tough line to draw. With deadlines, with companies wanting more and more out of less experienced developers. Me personally, I use two rules. Number one, I need to be able to write that code that I'd copied and pasted by myself within 2 weeks. Number two, I need to spend at least 30 minutes a day expanding my knowledge based on problems like these that I have encountered. Even if this particular problem has been solved and I understand what it is doing, I will read up more, research more, ask more questions to try to find out what else is there in this space, what else am I missing. This leads to the very difficult discussion of working or studying or learning outside of work. To recap from a previous discussion, software development is like a massive library of knowledge. What we learn at college is simply how to read the books from this library. We do not actually know much of anything that are in these books when we start working. This is our challenge, our lack of knowledge. There are very few of us that can say this is not needed. So if you're not prepared to work at least 1 to 2 hours outside of work, at least in the first few years of your career, then you cannot expect to get ahead of the pack. Sadly, most developers start working with the mindset that they know enough and that studying is behind them. This is very rarely true. When it comes to learning software and learning software development, we need to be persistent. A lot of the ideas and attitudes that we've come into software development with during our time at school, during our time at college, don't fit very well with what we're attempting to do. One of the most valuable skills that developers have is the ability to be persistent and patient. I've seen many people who go through something tough and technical. Most get past partway and they say, nope, I'm out. Some get to the end and say, I don't understand this. It's too difficult. I don't even know where to start. And they're not wrong. Very often, the gap between where we are and what we need to know is quite large. But we have to go back to the equation. We are at point A. We need to get to point B. And we have more than we think to help us get there. For one, we usually have time. It is unrealistic to expect to pick up something in one go. Just because the lecturer went through it once at college does not mean we get one go. Read it once. Read it twice. Read it 10 times even. The important thing is that each time we read it, we're coming back with slightly better tools. Our focus has improved a little bit. We'll remember a bit more, and we'll be more likely to make a connection between 2 points. We'll have a slightly better understanding at a higher level. We'll start to get an idea of what the questions are that we need to ask. So it is normal and not depressing when we read something for the first time and have almost no clue what we're reading. It is the beginning of learning. I have a system for when I have to go through something technically tough. I'll read it once with zero expectation of understanding. I know I won't get it the first time around. The aim is to get a lay of the land. For example, let's say I'm learning this framework. It's 18 chapters. First 2 chapters, it's about introduction and history and why the framework exists, etc. The next 4 chapters, basic example. The next 6 chapters, how does this thing create stuff on the web page? The next 3 chapters, how do we talk to an API? Final 3 chapters, some advanced scenarios. And so on the second go, I have some idea of where we're going. I can spend more time on the create stuff on the web page area because I know I'm not good at that. I can spend less time on the API area because I've done that before. And so step by step, we make our way forward. It's about persistence and patience. Reading other people's code is hard. It's something we have to learn to do. We have to practice. It is critical to our learning because software development is a team effort. It is not about my ability to write amazing code. It's about being able to write code that others can understand, that I can come back and still understand 6 months or a year later. Because realistically, when you go and read your code a year after you've written it, it may as well have been someone else that had written it. Because you would have probably learned so much in that year that you would wish you could go and just rewrite whatever it is that you had written. But unfortunately, often I will see developers who will look at a piece of code, they don't quite understand why it was done that way. It's not their style of coding. The person has done some things that they don't quite agree with, and their mind immediately jumps to, you know what, I need to rewrite this thing. And I'm pretty fast, so I'll probably be able to do it in a good amount of time. And that's not really something you want to be doing too much, because the more code you create, the more risk you create. Those sections of code now need to be retested. That creates more risk for all of the other code that's being used by that. And what could have been a few lines of change, and accepting that someone else has written that code with their style that you can try to be more understanding of, what you've now gone and done is created a massive mountain of work, not just for yourself, but for testers. And that's not even talking about the risk that it's creating, as other pieces of the system can now run into issues. Along the same lines, write code with consideration to others. After all, they will have to read your code as well. Many developers seem to feel that the largest effort goes into the creation of a product, the creation of capabilities, the addition of new functionality. But the reality is 80% of the time and cost of a software project is not in the creation of it, but in the maintenance of it over its lifetime. So when you're writing code, it is of massive importance that your code is maintainable. If your code is not maintainable, or makes the system harder to work with over time, or is brittle and not easily changed, then it is simply bad code. And these are concepts that we have to take into consideration when we're writing software. It is not simply about getting the task done. It's about following these concepts of reusable code, of maintainable code, of code not being brittle. These are incredibly important. Another idea that I've seen, or I won't say idea, another behavior that I've seen with developers that join the workplace, and unfortunately many of them keep this mindset going deep into their career, is the idea of fanboying. I've mentioned previously, one of the strongest beliefs I have with software development is that there are no silver bullets. There is no perfect solution. Any idea that you can come up with has upsides and downsides. If there is some solution that just seems absolutely perfect. It is only going to be our lack of experience and our lack of understanding that makes it seem so. So this idea of fanboying is you believing in a particular product, a particular company, a particular a language, any single entity in the software development space as being better than everything else. And such a product, I'm afraid, does not exist. Everything has upsides and downsides. To try to avoid this, I've always found it helpful to think practically. Respect the needs of the business and your team members. Whenever you're thinking about any particular entity in the software space, first try to be critical of it. And almost always you will find something. Your criticism may not actually apply. And so it could be that it is an awesome product or technology for your particular scenario. But as long as you're aware that that negative aspect exists, you will have a much rounder approach to software. And that is incredibly important. Along the lines of what was mentioned earlier, many developers are scared of the unknown. Up to this point, there's been a lot of hand-holding. You've been kind of told, this is what you need to learn, this is where you can find resources, and you've been very much protected in this box. And when you enter the real world, you're going to very quickly run into a lot of unknowns. Like I've said previously, learning is like a mosaic. You're going to be learning different things at different rates, all at the same time. So along those lines, respect the unknown, but don't fear it. Many software decisions are made because developers can't handle the simultaneous unknowns of something different. When you're presented with a task, don't just dive into writing code. And as a student and as someone with very little experience, this is really hard to do. When you're studying at college, when you're presented with tasks to do, so much of it is focused around the output of code to solve that particular problem. So immediately your mind goes to, okay, what do I need to solve this? I'm using this language, I maybe need that library. And before you know it, within 10 minutes, you're starting to hack out some code and let's see what we can get working. But so often, taking a little while to think through your problem, to try to make sense of it before you write any code down, can help you focus on the most critical elements first. A large part of problem solving is practicing to mentally project the solution, even in an abstract sense. Based off this, predict the portions of code you require to fill out the abstract blocks. This way, you have created a mental map of the path from no code to problem solved. It takes practice, but it's a skill that differentiates a great developer from an average one. And this is something that I've expanded more on in my previous video as well. Alright, so this is I would say generally good dev discussion. As I've said before, I'm kind of aiming for 8 of these sessions, but it's really difficult to break out one topic and not have it touch on areas that are coming up in other discussions, and vice versa. So yeah, there we have it. My discussions are on YouTube as well, these sessions. This is the 3rd session, so please go and watch the others. You're welcome to ask your questions there in the comments on YouTube. In addition to that, we have a Discord server which we have set up. The details for both the YouTube and the Discord server can be found if you just scroll down on the Twitch page. You'll find the details there. Yes. Okay. Levels in software development. So there are very few careers, or I won't even say careers. Yeah. Okay. So let's say careers. There are very few careers where you can have people with the same roles or the same titles, and yet there be such a dramatic difference between two people who are, as far as the business is concerned, at the same level. If you're an auditor, or if you're an accountant, what you're kind of expected to know as a standard accountant is going to be much the same as every other accountant. And from there you may end up specializing in different areas of accountancy. Again, I'm not an accountant, but I would assume there must be different specialities. And if you're in let's just say law accountancy, or property accountancy, as a property accountant, you would be expected to know certain things that all the other property accountants would be expected to know as well. And to a very small extent, that exists as well in software development. But at the same time, there's so many other aspects that affect your ability as a software developer that it's not just about what you know technically. In Thursday's discussion, we're going to talk about what I call soft skills, non-dev specific skills that can really help you as a software developer. And from this perspective, I've seen senior developers who will take 8 weeks to do a particular portion of work and do a reasonably mediocre job at it. And I would see other senior developers in that same team who would finish that same work in 2 days with a much higher standard of quality than the other senior developers. And this is the differences of level with software developers that you find, so when you enter the software space, especially as a junior, come in with the idea of respect and humility, because they are individuals who are, in some cases your fellow junior developers, intermediate developers, and in some cases the senior developers who are so far beyond you that they have achieved in 5 years what it could very well take you 30 years to achieve. And so the question kind of becomes, how does this happen? How is it that you have these individuals who have such a vast difference in capability and yet are kind of on the same level? So the one part of the question there is how does this happen? And the how, I kind of have an example that I use. Imagine we're studying at college, and except this is, shall we say, the real world college. And over here, it's the beginning of the semester, and the lecturer comes and gives you 5-page document and says, there you go. This is what you need to deliver. Good luck. You know where my office is. If you want to submit it, submit. And that's it. They're there to assist. They are tutors to assist. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to go and find answers and solve this problem. And you do. And based on people's abilities to focus, or how quick they can understand and take on new data, and any number of other factors, submissions are going to happen at different times. And some people are going to do their first submission halfway through the semester. Others may be doing their first submission a week into the semester. But there's one important difference. You're not marked on your ability to get it correct. And the reason is because the lecturer will take your submission, he'll go through it, and what is incorrect, he'll hand back to you. And you'll need to fix it, and you'll need to get it correct. And you submit the second time, and the same process again. Whatever is not correct comes back. And so there is this idea of you own what you do. It's not just a case of you hand it off, okay, I got 65%. All right, that's not bad, at least I passed. No, that other 35% is going to sit on your shoulders and is going to remain on your shoulders until you get 100%. So then the question becomes, how would you actually be graded? Because essentially, based on the current system, everyone's going to get 100% eventually. You're graded by how quickly you can complete your tasks. Some people may reach that completion a week before the end of the semester. Others may reach that completion 2 weeks into the semester. And so if you extrapolate where we kind of stand here, if you take perhaps a student who's taken the entire semester and finally gets it right in, let's say, a 12-week semester, and you also get the student who's got it right in 2 weeks of the semester, what is he going to do for the other 10 weeks of that semester? If he carries on working on courses of this nature, he's basically going to learn at a 6-to-1 ratio. So you will have a student who can learn 6 times as much in a period of time as a fellow student. And yet they're both, so to speak, in this theoretical course, studying the same thing on the same level, have about the same level of knowledge as far as the institution is concerned, as far as the college is concerned. But the reality is very different. And then you go into a second semester and the gap just gets bigger. And then you go to second year and it gets bigger yet. Third year, and you compare these two individuals after the two of them have been at it for 5 years, you can imagine what one knows and what the other knows is dramatically different. And so that's how you end up with these individuals, with these scenarios in the workplace where you have one person who can do a fantastic job in 2 days. And at the same level, you also have another person who will take 2 weeks to do the same thing, and it will be a best effort, and probably a mediocre one at that. So why do those who are kind of mediocre in that sense stay at that level? That's a whole nother discussion. And part of the aim of this community is to help people understand where they stand in this regard, and to try to motivate them to push further, to be more than a mediocre developer. Yeah. So that is the concept of levels. I've seen it in a number of companies I've worked at, and there are all sorts of different consequences. In some places, you end up with unfortunate consequence where, well, some developers view it as a good place to be, where the company can't manage without them. They are unfireable because they just know too much about things that no one else in the company knows about, and it's too much of a risk to fire them for whatever reason, or to allow them to leave. But that creates another problem, because if you're that indispensable, you're also unpromotable. So you find scenarios where you will have a very strong developer who's unhappy because one of his fellow developers became a team lead or became a manager, and is now to some degree at a higher level than they are, even though you would like to think that the person who's the best at the job should be the one who deserves the reward. But not always. It creates complications, and these can often become very complicated scenarios, for business, for the individuals involved, for many reasons. Sometimes people don't communicate. Sometimes people aren't clear, not just to the company but to themselves. What do you want? Do you want to continue developing? Do you want to move up to some leadership position where you're spending less time developing and more time managing or leading? What do you want? Sometimes the company can do it. Other times the companies can't afford to do it, simply because, like I said, you've just got too much company knowledge in your position that's isolated, that no one else knows about. So these can become very sticky situations. But that's the idea of, between one senior developer and another senior developer, what a massive difference you can get in two individuals. All right. So for chat or on our Discord server, please, if there are any questions, drop your questions in there, and I'm happy to answer them. The Discord server is an area where anyone can come and hang out. They can ask questions. They can just join in the discussion and see what others are talking about, and generally just be a part of the community, because the more you know, the better prepared you'll be. Okay, we have one question here. Well, two questions. What is a mistake that you see many interns or juniors do, and how can they fix those mistakes? Juniors and interns make a variety of mistakes, And it's unusual because so often there's strange mistakes that kind of make it obvious that you're not been very long in the working world. Like I said, to kind of summarize, you need to try to be as focused and as valuable as you can be to your company. Focus on the day to day and putting one foot in front of the other, rather than focusing on the long term. And let me clarify that. That's not to say don't think about the long term. It is, especially in your beginning years, it is immensely critical to think about the long term. But it's about what you communicate. I've had juniors come in with less than a year of working experience, and they're talking about how they're going to become architects, or how they're going to become technical leaders, or they'll be in a IT management position in a few years. And it makes it very obvious that, while it may seem that it's not a bad idea to discuss this, you're very far away from that. And most managers, most team leads and team members want to know much more about the short term. This is something that's come up in interviews, and I can understand how, they come in and they say, okay, I want to talk about this because it shows that I have ambition, that I have a goal in mind, that I'm aiming for something. It's not just about, okay, I'm just here to work, and that's appreciated. But you got to put it in perspective, from the sense of, yes, you want to do that, but what do you want to do in between that? You got a long time between where you are as an intern or as a junior and a software architect, So from that perspective, trying to say, okay, you know what, my goal is to be a software architect. It's like, no, right now, you have so little experience, you have almost no idea of what a software architect even is. And it's kind of that idea that, when juniors talk about these kinds of positions, and it becomes very obvious that it's for them, for their knowledge and their understanding, it's like a pie in the sky. And, while we want to see that, you have ambition, you have goals, you have you have drive. If the output of that is this pie in the sky, then you don't actually have any of those practically. You have a very, very unrealistic idea or a very unrealistic answer trying to portray your drive and your ambition. So in that sense, as to take that one example, if that is the aim, right? Firstly, you got to kind of walk up to it, say between year and at least one or two other positions, and then architect, or then team lead, but also why. Why do you want to be an architect? Why do you want to be a team lead? Make sure you can answer that question. Speak to other developers about your answer. And this is another thing, is that in a general sense, a lot of what interns and juniors come into the workspace with is a range of misunderstandings, a range of or a lack of range of ideas. They come in with a single idea that, every single developer is like this or has to do this. Every single manager is like this. Every single company or environment is like this. And the reality is, it isn't. There are a wide range of companies, of environments, of expectations, of roles. Even from one company to the next, they may have different structures, different pay grades. And so having a singular idea of what it is like leaves you very short-handed. And it shows when you're interviewing or on your CV. Sometimes you'd see someone would put something like 4 or 5 times in their CV, and it's got almost no realistic weight. Yet you can see this person is convinced or has convinced themselves that this is something that companies want to see, that managers want to see. And it's very rarely the case. So this is the kind of community that we're creating, that we hope you can come with your questions, you can join the discussions, and we can talk about these concepts and these ideas, and the hope is to pass on this knowledge to those with little working experience about what the working world is like. Another question. Coming out of college and going into the workspace, what is expected of me? Do I need to have a certain level of knowledge? I'm always worried that I don't know enough. Right? So let me go backwards on this one, right? I'm always worried that I don't know enough. You should be, because you don't. If there's one takeaway from this entire discussion, it's that. Like I've mentioned in my previous course, the aim of college is to teach you to be able to read. But your ability to read and the actual absorption of knowledge from the books is what you will be doing in the workplace. So you're trained, but you've not put your training to any real test until you've started working. So yes, you don't know enough, but you don't need to worry. You need to try to learn more. The reality is that you're going to have different developers at different skill levels. But the fortunate part of that is that there is a lot of demand globally for software developers. And so unless you're really poor, if you can communicate well, if you have some sense of skill, you will find work. You just got to get yourself in the door. The aim is to learn. You're always going to be learning, whether you're a junior developer all the way until when you're way up as upper management. You're learning every single day, and if you're not, you're going to be falling behind. Do I need to have a certain level of knowledge? Yes, you do. That knowledge, that level of knowledge, is what's going to get you into the door. That knowledge that gets you through the door is almost definitely not going to be enough to do your job. How does that make sense? It makes sense because very rarely do managers hire based on the skill set that you actually have. It's not often that you can hire someone and say, listen, this guy has the perfect set of skills that we need to get the work done. There's very little that we actually need to teach this guy. Managers hire based on potential. They can see, okay, over the last 3 years, this is what you've studied. That's your kind of your working starting point. This is what you're doing now. During those 3 years, you've probably absorbed about that much. And we're happy with that rate of absorption. And we can teach you what you need to know once you start working here. In most companies, the first few months is largely a production write-off. There's very few developers who can become productive in like the first month. It's about understanding the frameworks, the policies and procedures, the different ways, the different teams, the different structures in your new company. And until you can get some idea of that and many other things, you can't really work in that sense of isolation, of not knowing the larger tree that you're sitting on. So that takes a bit of time, usually a few months, for you to kind of cross that gap and get to that point where you can start to add value to the team, to the company, to the products that you're working on. So yes, the higher your level of knowledge is, the more likely you are to find work, and the more likely you are to find work that you want to be working on. Not everyone will find a position where they're going to be doing what they want to be doing. For some people, they have to take it out of necessity. Perhaps they're they're moving to a different area. They need the pay raise. They're very unhappy in the current position, and you'd rather take something that's different and uncomfortable and not quite what you want to go into, rather than stay where you are. So there are any number of reasons that people may move, that people may make non-optimal choices. But again, in those cases, you may still get hired for your ability to learn to do something rather than your ability to do that something right now. That's important to keep in mind in terms of having a certain level of knowledge. Coming out of college and going into the workspace, what is expected of me? That expectation is very different and based on any number of things. Like I said, different companies have different ways of doing things. There are different environments. What is expected of you basically is to try your best, to put in the effort, and to pay attention to what's going around you. Listen to your managers, listen to your seniors, and do the best that you can do. In some cases, companies are very good at kind of helping developers or juniors or those who are working for the first time transition into the workspace, and kind of guide them and move along with them. On the other end of the scale, I've seen companies that are, that almost any developer in an area would be happy to go and work at that company because it's an amazing place. They pay well. They have a very chilled out environment, or a number of other reasons. They would hire 10 developers, put them in a team with 3 or 4 seniors, and just basically leave them. They would really tell them what to do. They get some vague instructions, almost no support, very little assistance. And at the end of the year, the managers or HR will come to the team leads and say, okay, or the seniors in the team and say, okay, out of these 10, who do you want to keep? And they may say, okay, I like this guy or I like these 2 fellas. Right, that's it. Keep them. The other 8 contracts are not renewed. Best of luck. And, okay, maybe it's more rare now, but it's happened. These kinds of things happen. So you got to also try to go into the situation with your eyes open. You got to be aware that these things happen, and try to read the situation that you're in. Be aware of what's going on around you, and decide for yourself. Okay, you know what? Is this an environment that I want to continue to be in? And if that's the case, you basically got to be that number 1 or number 2 guy. And if you're not, and you're not going to be, right? Then you'll know in advance, you know what? I came in here with a 1-year contract, and based on that, I don't know what's going on. I cannot figure it out. No one's giving me any assistance. So I'll probably know months in advance, okay, I may as well start looking, because come end of the year, my contract is not going to be renewed. Having said that, it is an unusual scenario, but also, as always, communicate. Talk to your teams, to your seniors, talk to your team leads or your managers. Even go and talk to HR and say, listen, this is what I'm kind of seeing. I'm not happy. Can you assist? But the reality is some environments are incredibly high demand, not high stress. You are expected to function at 150% for long periods of time. And this is their way of saying, listen, out of these 10 guys, these 1 or 2 have potential, the rest of them just don't. Because even for the seniors, for them to be spending any kind of time to assist the juniors is time that's impacting them, because they also have to manage, or have to push at 150%, going over and above every single day. And these environments exist as well. So what is expected of you? Basically, to try your best. The fact that you've gotten in, that they've chosen to take you on board, means they've seen the potential in you. You got to see that potential in yourself. Take joy in the fact that they see good things for you, and help them bring that to fruition. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? No, that looks about it. Okay. Thank you everyone for attending today's session. Yeah, like I said, these videos are going on YouTube. We have a Discord server as well, which is a place to come and chat and just hang out and just request help, and we're here to help as best as we can. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for dropping by, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.